Hello everyone, this is your instructor, Jean Myers, giving you a little bit of a PowerPoint with some voiceover, one of the tools we use in the online environment. And this topic is on just an overview of a lot of the material you've been covering so far. So let's get started. First, let's cover some of the major areas and trends that you've been looking at in your readings. One of the main sources are texts that we've been utilizing is the Zawachi-Richter and Anderson Delphi study. And what I liked about this work is it gives you a real broad base to work from. Looks at things from the macro, meso, and micro level. And this is helpful because you really need to know not only how the work you're reading is situated, but where you potentially might see your research areas. But as you go through your works, it's interesting to try and figure out where these fit. And we'll be having a little quiz on this as well. At the macro level, a lot of what was covered has to do with, some of these larger concepts that distance learning, and that's why we needed a theoretical and historical base to work from, and why we began with a lot of that. So the inherent role of this distance learning or online research and the role that it covers primarily has to do with reducing inequality and increasing access of education. It also has to do with the globalization of education, making things very far-reaching and inclusive of many cultures, societies throughout the world, and the systems of delivery that distance learning uses, such as the hybrid model or the pure online model. But it does also talk about the various foundational types of theories that we saw particularly early on, mainly constructivism, having to do with interactions and connectivism, and also the impact that research and writing has had on the practices involved in online and distance learning. Obviously, various literature reviews, and many of our professional associations have provided a lot of this, particularly early on. On the meso level, however, we have more of a management and organizational strategy involved. And these tend to look at some of the things which we realized later were not as predominantly studied. However, there seems to be a great need for them. And some of you have expressed some interest in these areas, so that's wonderful. Costs and benefits, not a common topic among educators, as you know, but this is becoming more and more prevalent, particularly as we have not for either for-profit agencies, as the government starts to look at our students being appropriately charged for their educations. Are their educations useful and practical? And online learning organizations, of course, many come to mind, Capella, Phoenix, etc., even locally, our Bryant and Stratton. These things have become more a subject of study as the regulators are more heavily examining them. And falling into this group are things like innovative programs, change that has occurred over time, professional development, and of course, the many avenues of quality assurance, such as everything from quality matters to the OLC rubric, etc. There's all sorts of things that come in on that level. Micro level is instructional design. My topics was predominantly focused on instructional design. However, I did have to put an administrative and more of a meso-level slant in mind that has to do with, what do we know about quality design and what sort of decisions do we need to make to ensure that. And of course, things such as professional learning communities are very popular these days. Very difficult to study, I might add, because they fall into many avenues and they're difficult to isolate in terms of what factors affect what. But basically, also, you have on this micro level learner characteristics very, very well studied in our field and usually is part of almost any study. We have looked at many major journals and literature sources already. These were some identified by Zwichter and Anderson, mainly some of these big journals, and there are more. Our librarian, Chris, has been helpful in helping us see some of these. But in this particular study, they looked at 695 papers between 2000 and 2008, which brings up the importance of dates, meaning how recent is the study that you're looking at. Some of your committee members or other professors may say, hey, 2008, this stuff is already almost 8 years old. How relevant is it? And I just caution you to be careful of that. I originally started to look at very recent articles. I had one professor even say it needed to be within 4 to 5 years. But you know what? When I looked further back, it provided me a much firmer base for my theoretical investigation. And also, I found that some of the earlier studies were less cluttered, more focused. They had less interfering factors and, in some instances, cleaner constructs involved. So, all I'm saying is let every study's quality stand for itself, and you will be able to make some judgments from there. What we saw as reported was the micro perspective was in general over represented, teaching and learning highly represented, and of course, if over 50% of the papers were on these top issues, sorry to say I'm guilty of being in that group, but as I said, there is a way to weave additional components into your study and your work that may make it slightly more valuable. And obviously, in implications for studies, that whole section you're talking about how your work situates in the field and how you can potentially influence policy making decisions, etc. So look at how small innovation and change is. That's just horrible. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I hope that's not still true. Because our field is all about innovation and change. So why are we not making that a topic of study? I'm not quite sure. What does this all mean for you? The research that you do and that you read, you should be looking for gaps. You should be looking for the impact that you can particularly have. And, that sometimes comes with time. So if you don't know all of that right up front, you just want to take a look. And obviously, in your literature reviews and some of the works I've given you here, is to help you see how do other people, verify and deepen and broaden the impact of their research. And that's comes from a great deal of studying the literature that is out there. The goals for their study also were to get a major theoretical insight. Whoops, typo there. Sorry, guys. It happens. And to provide very good perspectives. And I do appreciate the fact, as they mentioned in their chapter, that they were looking for those researchers who have a reputation for looking beyond the obvious and mapping out a research agenda. So your research agenda is formulated all the time, even if you're new to this or somewhat experienced in this. It will always evolve over time if you're open to new ideas. However, I did want to point out, and I will do a separate presentation on instructional design because there's a great chapter in the book about that. It does serve as an umbrella. I mean, how do you have online learning without instructional design? Let's see. Retention and persistence is also very persistent in the literature. Honestly, it's still coming up today, where we're constantly fighting in the online learning world for additional support, meaning that you know distance learning is a viable learning medium. That it doesn't need to be particularly um, what's the word I'm looking for, victimized all the time, but it does still fight that slant from our more traditional academics. However, new themes and topics are always evolving, and that's what's so great about being involved in research. And it really is kind of funny, but over time, you can actually get excited about it because when you start realizing um, that your perspective has value, it's a wonderful thing. So I encourage you. Research overview summary. Um, Again, the overview here of macro, meso, and micro that the authors provide to us in these works is a great way to categorize. Whenever you're reading an article or a study, I suggest you indicate, just write right on it or somewhere in your notes, what is it, macro, meso, or micro, or is it a combination thereof? Obviously, if it's quantitative or qualitative, and you get better over time at summarizing these articles. I realize sometimes they're extremely difficult to read. All I can say is you do your best, you force yourself to read through it, and over time, by osmosis, you do get better at it. And of course, use your library resources to help. Look at your interest areas and research agenda and topics and ask yourself, where do they fit in? I did ask you to share with me in your, gosh, I don't have it in front of me, whatever week. I asked you to write about your topic, and of course, I'll be giving you detailed feedback about that. Overall, how does your interest serve the field? How original can it be? And what can be learned that we don't already know? You have to always keep these questions in your mind because your work does need and works out well to be original. Research is original. What will your contributions be? Remember that you need to have a theoretical base to guide your direction. It will be demanded by any research committee, and that your questions in the end will guide your research. Mine evolved right up to almost the bitter end, but you cannot get through the proposal process without really solid questions. And I ask you, if you have any ready to be looked at in any way or are toying around with them, to feel free to run them past me, because gosh knows I wrote an awful lot of them that were rejected and tweaked, and it will work out in the end, I promise, but it really is important to get them just right. So thank you, everybody, and I will be talking to you again soon.